I need to say up front that I was not a hiker. I want that to be clear, because people assume I had some personal stake in the trails, some deep love for the outdoors that drew me into this. I didn't. I was a digital media coordinator for the Marin County Parks Department, which meant I spent my days in a beige office building on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, scheduling social media posts about trail closures, invasive plant species, and weekend volunteer opportunities. I answered emails. I resized photographs. I wrote captions that included hashtags I privately found embarrassing. It was not meaningful work, but it was steady. And after 3 years of freelance graphic design that paid late or not at all, steady felt like oxygen. The office was small. 5 of us shared 2 rooms above a sandwich shop. My desk faced a window that looked onto a parking lot and, beyond it, a sliver of fog-colored hillside. The fluorescent tubes overhead had a barely perceptible flicker that I'd stopped noticing within the first month. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew when it rained. I mention these details because this is where the thing happened. Not on a trail, not in the woods, not in some liminal wilderness. It happened at my desk, in an office chair, with a broken armrest, while I was doing the most mundane work of my professional life. Marin County has somewhere around 30 open space preserves and a dozen state and national park areas. The Parks Department maintained an active social media presence, Instagram primarily, but also a Facebook page that got moderate engagement from retirees and local hiking groups. Part of my job was curating user-submitted photographs for a weekly feature we called Trail Moments. People would tag us or use a specific hashtag, and I'd scroll through submissions every Monday, select 3 or 4 that were well composed, credit the photographer, and post them throughout the week. It was mindless, pleasant work. Golden light through redwoods, fog rolling over ridgelines, the occasional deer or coyote, sometimes a really spectacular mushroom. I probably looked at 10,000 trail photographs in my 2 years there, and they blurred together into a kind of warm ambient wallpaper of the natural world. The first time was a Tuesday in February. I remember because Tuesdays were when I did the deeper scroll. Mondays I selected from the most recent submissions, but Tuesdays I went further back to catch anything the algorithm had buried. I was looking at a photo, tagged from the Dipsia Trail, taken the previous Saturday. Standard composition, the trail curving left through a stand of bay laurel. Morning light angled low, a bit of lens flare that gave it a pleasant washed look. The photographer was a woman named Sarah Okafor, a regular contributor whose work was reliably good. I'd used her shots maybe 4 times previously. In the background of this particular image, maybe 40 feet behind the curve of the trail, there were 2 figures. They were slightly out of focus, but clearly human. A man and a woman, both wearing day packs, both facing the trail rather than walking along it. They were standing just off the path in the underbrush, and something about their posture struck me as slightly odd. They weren't mid-step. They weren't looking at anything specific. They were just standing, angled toward the camera, partially obscured by a bay laurel trunk. I didn't think anything of it. Trails have people on them. I moved on. I selected Sarah's photo along with 3 others and scheduled them for the week. The following Monday, I was doing my usual scroll when I stopped on a submission from a man named Tom Aldridge. He'd tagged us from the Matt Davis Trail, which connects to the Dipsea at certain junctions, but runs a different route down toward Stinson Beach. His photo was taken on Sunday, one day after Sarah's. Wide shot of the trail descending through coastal scrub, Pacific visible in the background as a gray-blue smear. 2 figures in the mid-ground, same posture, standing just off trail, angled toward the camera, day packs. The woman was slightly behind the man. They were clearer in this shot because the vegetation was lowers. No tree trunks obscuring them. The man appeared to be wearing a dark green or olive jacket. The woman had something red at her collar, maybe a bandana or the edge of a hood. I paused, not because I recognized them consciously, but because something about the spatial composition felt repeated. The angle, the placement within the frame. That particular quality of standing that wasn't quite waiting and wasn't quite watching. I pulled up Sarah's photo from the week before and put them side by side on my monitor. Same 2 people. I was almost certain. Same builds, same pack shapes, same relative positioning. The man slightly forward, the woman offset to his right and a half step behind. I want to be precise about my reaction. Here, I did not feel afraid. I did not feel anything close to afraid. I felt a mild professional curiosity, the kind you'd feel noticing that the same jogger appeared in 2 different traffic camera screenshots. Trails in Marin are popular. People hike on consecutive days. People have regular routes. There was nothing remarkable about 2 hikers appearing in 2 different photographs, taken on adjacent days on trails that share a trailhead parking lot. I noted it the way you note anything mildly interesting during an 8-hour day at a desk, and I forgot about it. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing a batch of submissions from a weekend that had been unusually clear and sunny, rare for February in coastal Marin. We'd gotten maybe 40 tagged photos, which was higher than average. I was moving through them quickly, selecting for composition and variety. I wanted a mix of trails, a mix of conditions, ideally, something with wildlife. I stopped on a photo from Ring Mountain, which is in Tiburon, the opposite side of the county from the Dipsea and Matt Davis trails, 20 miles away at minimum. The photo showed the serpentine grassland near the summit, that particular alien green that the mineral-rich soil produces. Late afternoon light, long shadows, 2 figures on the hillside below the photographer's vantage point. Standing, not walking, facing generally upward toward the camera's position. The man in something dark. The woman with that red at her collar. This time I felt something, not fear. More like the feeling when you realize you've been spelling a word wrong for years and someone finally points it out, a corrective jolt. A sense that something I'd passively been looking at had just resolved into something I needed to actively look at. I went back through my files. I'm organized. It's the one professional virtue I can genuinely claim. Every photo I've ever selected or reviewed gets saved in a dated folder with the photographer's name and trail location. I opened February's folder and started scanning. Sarah Okafor, Dipsia Trail, February 8. Tom Aldridge, Matt Davis Trail, February 9th. A photographer I hadn't selected, named Michel Fournier, Coastal Trail near Muir Beach, February 15. I'd rejected this one because the composition was cluttered. I opened it, mid-ground, partially behind a Monterey pine. 2 figures, standing, same orientation. A woman named Beatrice Chen, Cataract Falls Trail, February 22. I'd selected this one for posting. I opened it and looked at the background with new attention. The trail above the falls was visible in the upper portion of the frame, and there, small, distant, but unmistakable once I was looking for them, were 2 shapes, standing, off-trail, angled toward the camera. I sat back in my chair. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead with its imperceptible flicker. The parking lot outside my window held 4 cars. I could hear Marcus in the next room talking on the phone about a grant application. Normal Tuesday afternoon sounds. Normal Tuesday afternoon life. I pulled up every submission from the month of February. All 40, plus from the last sunny weekend, plus the 20 or so from each preceding week. I went through them one by one, expanding each to full screen, scanning the backgrounds with a focus I had never applied to this task before. They were in 9 of them. 9 photographs taken across a span of 3 weeks, on 7 different trails spread across the entire county. Always in the background, always standing, always off trail, always oriented toward the camera. That night, I went home to my apartment in San Anselmo, a 1-bedroom above a laundromat that I could barely afford even with the county salary. I made pasta and ate it standing at the counter because I'd never bought a proper dining table. I did not think about the photographs. I watched television for 2 hours and went to bed at 11. At 2 in the morning, I was awake, sitting up in the dark, and the thought that was waiting for me was this: how many photographs had I scrolled past without looking carefully? How many of the thousands of trail photos I'd reviewed in my time at this job had contained those 2 figures standing in the background, unnoticed because I'd never had reason to look? I did not go back to sleep. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, before 8, which was unusual for me. I logged into our social media accounts and began scrolling backward through every Trail Moments post I'd ever published. There were over 100, stretching back to my start date 14 months prior. The 3rd one I checked, from the previous November, showed the Bolinas Ridge Trail at sunset. I had selected it for the quality of the light. In the lower right, where the trail dipped toward a grove of bishop pines, 2 figures stood in the shadow of the trees. I had never noticed them. They were small, they were dark, they were perfectly still. I checked them all, every single posted photograph. They were in 11 of the 100+ images I'd already put on the department's public accounts. 11 photographs I had personally selected, cropped, captioned, and published, each containing 2 people standing motionless in the background. I want to describe what this felt like because I think it's important. It was not cinematic dread. It was not creeping horror. It was embarrassment, professional embarrassment. I had been looking at these images as my job, literally my job, and I had missed something that, now that I could see it, seemed impossible to miss. Their presence wasn't hidden. It wasn't subtle once you knew to look. They were just figures in a landscape, and my brain had categorized them as hikers every single time because that's what figures on a trail are, I told Marcus. He was my supervisor, a pleasant, distracted man in his 50s who had worked for the Parks Department for 20 years and spent most of his mental energy on budgets and interdepartmental communications. I showed him 3 of the photographs side by side on my monitor. Same 2 people, I said. Look, same builds, same clothing, same position relative to each other. Always off trail, always facing the camera. Marcus leaned in. He smelled like coffee and the particular deodorant he wore. He studied the images for maybe 20 seconds. Huh, he said. Regulars, probably. You'd be amazed how many people hike every single day. Every single day on different trails, 20 miles apart, he shrugged. Dedicated, retired maybe. People do that. They work their way through every trail in the county. He straightened up. Is there a problem? They're in 11 of our posted photos, I said, at least. Over 14 months. Different trails, different days, different photographers. Marcus looked at me with an expression I recognized. The one supervisors get when they're trying to determine whether a subordinate site is bringing them a genuine issue or an obsession. Are they doing anything, trespassing off-trail in a sensitive area? They're just standing there. Then they're hikers, he said. He clapped my shoulder lightly and went back to his desk. He was right, of course. That was the reasonable interpretation. I knew it was the reasonable interpretation even as I sat there, feeling unsatisfied by it. 2 people who like to hike appear in hiking photographs. That is not a mystery. That is not even an anomaly. It is expected. It is the most boring explanation possible. And boring explanations are almost always correct. I went back to work. I scheduled that week's posts. I answered emails about a trail closure due to landslide risk on the coastal trail. I ate lunch at my desk. A sandwich from downstairs and a bag of chips from the vending machine. I did not look at the photographs again, but I did something else. Something I can't fully explain as a rational, professional decision. I started a spreadsheet. Date, trail location, photographer name, position in frame, estimated distance from camera, clothing visible. I told myself it was documentation, the way you'd document any recurring pattern in public space. Not because it was threatening, but because noticing patterns was literally part of my job. Social media engagement patterns, seasonal posting patterns, trail usage patterns. This was just another pattern. March brought rain. Marin gets most of its annual rainfall between November and March, and this year March came in heavy. Submissions dropped. People don't photograph trails in the rain, or rather, they do, but the resulting images are gray and flat and don't perform well on social media. I had fewer photos to review. Some weeks I stretched to find 3 usable submissions. During the first week of March, I received only 6 tagged photographs for the entire week. 4 were essentially unusable, poor composition, bad lighting. One appeared to be taken accidentally. The remaining 2 were both from Phoenix Lake, taken on the same day by different photographers who did not appear to know each other. The first showed the lake's surface in the rain, circles expanding and intersecting where droplets hit. Moody and effective, no figures visible. The second showed the trail on the north side of the lake, the photographer apparently heading counterclockwise. Redwoods on both sides, the trail muddy and rutted, everything dripping. 2 figures standing off trail to the left, approximately 25 feet from the camera position. They were wet. I could tell they were wet because their clothing, the dark jacket, the woman's red-collared outer layer, had that particular saturated look that fabric gets in sustained rain. Their hair was wet. The man's was plastered to his forehead. The woman's was darker than I'd seen it in other photos, weighted by water. They were standing in the rain, not under a tree, not sheltered, standing in the open between 2 redwoods, facing the trail, apparently unconcerned about the weather. I added them to my spreadsheet. Date March 4. Trail Phoenix Lake Loop, north side. Photographer David Wannett. Position left of frame, mid-ground. Distance approximately 25 feet. Clothing consistent. Notes visibly wet. No rain gear. No apparent shelter-seeking behavior. That was the first entry that felt different. Not because standing in the rain is inexplicable. People do it. But because every other person in every other rain photograph I'd ever reviewed was either actively moving or clearly sheltered. People hike in rain, but they hike, they move, they lean forward, they wear hoods and gaiters and keep a pace that generates warmth. They don't stand still in it. Standing still in cold rain is physiologically unpleasant in a way that the body rebels against involuntarily. You shiver, you hunch, you seek cover or keep moving. You don't stand with your face tilted slightly upward toward a stranger's camera, motionless, getting soaked. I didn't tell Marcus. By mid-March, the rain eased and submissions picked up again. I found them in 2 more photographs from the second week. Once on the Verna Dunshee Trail, around the summit of Mount Tamalpais, once on a fire road in the Cascade Canyon Preserve. Same posture, same placement, always background, always still. My spreadsheet had 18 entries now, spanning 15 months and 13 different trail locations across the county. I started mapping them, literally, on a printout of the county trail system that I kept pinned above my desk. Small red dots, they were everywhere. No clustering, no pattern in location. They appeared on coastal trails and interior trails, on ridgelines and in canyons, in redwood groves and on exposed grassland. The only consistency was the trails themselves. They never appeared in parking lots, at trailheads, or on roads. They were always on the trail or immediately adjacent to it, and they were always in someone else's photograph. That distinction mattered to me then, though I couldn't have articulated why. They weren't seeking cameras. They weren't posing. They were simply present in the frame whenever someone happened to photograph the landscape they were standing in, as if they were part of the landscape. I want to describe what I did next because I'm not proud of it and because it changed things. I contacted Okafor. She was a regular contributor, and we'd exchanged professional emails before, me thanking her for submissions, her asking about image credits, that kind of thing. I sent her a message that I tried to make casual. Hi, Sarah. Love your recent shots, as always. Quick question. In your Feb 8 Dipsea shot, there are 2 hikers in the background. Did you happen to see them on the trail that day? Just asking. Because they've showed up in a few different people's shots, and we're trying to identify regular users for a potential feature. This was a lie. We were not doing a feature on regular users. I invented the premise because I needed a reason to ask that didn't sound like what it was. She replied the next day. Hey, which photo? I don't remember seeing anyone behind me, but it was pretty busy that morning. Happy to help if you can point me to the image. I sent her the image with the 2 figures circled. She responded within the hour. Oh, weird. I literally don't remember them at all. And I feel like I would have noticed. I kind of have a thing about people standing off trail. It bothers me from an erosion perspective. They must have come up behind me right after I took the shot. Sorry, I can't be more helpful. I contacted Tom Aldridge next. Similar email. Similar invented premise. His response, no idea who they are. Honestly, didn't even notice them until you pointed them out. I was focused on the view. Pretty sure the trail was empty when I was there. I remember because I like hiking early to avoid crowds. David Wanat, the Phoenix Lake photographer, I was alone on that section. 100%. It was pouring, and I didn't see another person for the entire loop. Are you sure those aren't just shadows on the trees? I looked at his photograph again. They were not shadows on the trees. They were 2 people. You could see the sheen of rain on the man's jacket. You could see the woman's hands at her sides. I did not contact any more photographers. The thing I need to explain, the thing that made this different from a curiosity, different from a weird pattern that could be filed away and ignored, is what happened when I tried to find them myself, not on the trail. I want to be clear about that. I never went looking for them on the trails. What I did was try to find them in databases. Marin County had at that time a missing persons registry that was publicly accessible. It was not extensive. The county is wealthy, suburban, safe. Most entries were historic. Elderly hikers lost in the 70s, a teenager who ran away in 1998 and was found 3 weeks later in Portland. But there were 2 active cases from the previous year. Daniel Oberlin, 34, last seen on the steep ravine trail on Mount Tamalpais, October 12 of the prior year. He was a solo day hiker. His car was found at the Pantall trailhead at the end of the day by a ranger doing parking lot sweeps. Keys still in the ignition. Pack, water, trail snacks all missing, consistent with someone who had simply walked away and not come back. The search lasted 9 days and covered every trail within a 5-mile radius. Nothing was found. No body, no gear, no sign of injury or falling. He was simply gone. Rachel Vasquez, 28. Last seen at the Five Brooks Trailhead in Point Reyes, January 3, 6 weeks before I first noticed the figures. She'd told her roommate she was hiking to Alamara Falls, a popular but somewhat strenuous out-and-back route. She never returned. Her car was in the lot. Her phone was found on the trail, approximately 2 miles in, lying face down on the ground with a dead battery. The search was extensive. Coast Guard, volunteer teams, dogs. The terrain between Five Brooks and the coast is dense. Douglas fir, bishop pine, heavy undergrowth in the creek drainages. People had gotten lost there before, but they'd always been found, usually within 48 hours, usually hypothermic but alive. Rachel was never found. I looked at the photographs. The man in the dark jacket, the woman with the red at her collar. I looked at the missing persons files. Daniel Oberlin's physical description 5 by 10, medium build, brown hair. Last seen wearing an olive green rain shell over a dark fleece. Rachel Vasquez 5'5", athletic build, dark hair past her shoulders. Last seen wearing a red and black quarter-zip pullover. I looked at the photographs. I want to tell you that I felt horror. That would be the expected response, and it would make this story feel more complete. But what I felt was closer to nausea, the physical gut-level kind you get when a car almost hits you and you realize it a half-second after it's already passed. A retrospective awareness of proximity to something bad, and then, this is important, I felt doubt, because the descriptions were generic. Medium build, dark jacket, red collar. These could describe thousands of people. I was fitting evidence to a conclusion I'd already reached, which is exactly what conspiracy theorists do. I was in an office above a sandwich shop in suburban California, convincing myself that two missing people were appearing in trail photographs months after they'd disappeared, standing motionless in the background like they were waiting for something. People don't do that. Missing people are either dead, lost, or voluntarily absent. They don't show up in strangers' vacation photos. I closed the missing persons registry. I closed my spreadsheet. I went downstairs and bought a sandwich and ate it at my desk. And the fluorescent light buzzed, and Marcus coughed in the next room, and the afternoon happened the way all afternoons happened. I went home. I made dinner. I did not think about it, except I did. I thought about it in the specific way that things you're avoiding occupy more mental space than things you're engaging with. Every time I opened my photo review folder, I felt the presence of those two figures, the way you feel someone standing behind you in a line. They were in everything I looked at now, even photographs they weren't in. I scanned every background, every midground, every shadow beneath every tree, and the act of not finding them was almost worse than finding them, because it meant they were somewhere I wasn't looking. April, the first genuinely warm week. Submissions flooded in, 50, 60, 70 tagged photos. Spring wildflowers on Ring Mountain, waterfalls at full volume from the winter rain, migrating birds, newts on the trail. People loved newts. I reviewed them with a discipline that had become almost clinical. I was no longer looking at composition or light or color. I was looking at backgrounds. I was looking for them. I found them in 4 photographs from the first week of April alone. Ring Mountain again. The Serpent Grassland photographed from below this time. And there they were, on the ridgeline, 2 shapes against the sky, standing. On the Bolinas Ridge Fire Road, visible through a gap in the trees on the slope below. On the Miwok Trail, near Tennessee Valley, very distant, maybe 70 or 80 feet back, but unmistakable in their posture and their relative positioning to each other. And in one photograph that stopped my breathing, it was submitted by a woman named Jenny Park. She'd tagged us from the steep ravine trail, the same trail where Daniel Oberlin had last been seen 6 months prior. Her photo was of the famous ladder section, where the trail descends through a fern-choked canyon on a series of wooden stairs and ladders bolted into rock. She'd taken it from below, looking up, capturing the vertical green of the canyon walls and the ladder ascending into mist. They were at the top of the ladder, both of them, not in the deep background this time, not distant shapes half hidden by vegetation. They were maybe 15 feet above the photographer's position, standing at the top of the wooden staircase, looking down. I could see their faces. I should say, I could see the areas where their faces were. The photograph was taken in shade, in a mist-filled canyon, and the quality was phone camera digital, slightly noisy, slightly soft. But they were close enough and facing directly enough toward the camera that I could make out the geometry of their features. The man's face was thin, his hair was wet from mist stuck to his forehead. His expression was, and I need to be careful with language here because I want to be accurate, his expression was not blank, it was not empty or emotionless. It was the expression of someone listening to something they find interesting, attentive, engaged. Like someone at a lecture who's just heard a point they want to remember. The woman's face was partially turned toward the man, as if she'd been looking at him and was in the process of turning back toward the camera. She was almost smiling, not quite. The corner of her mouth suggested it. I enlarged the image to full resolution. I studied it for a long time. The detail was not sufficient for a definitive identification, but the man's bone structure, the specific way his ears sat, the width of his brow, these were consistent with the single photograph of Daniel Oberlin that accompanied his missing persons case. The woman's build, her hair's particular weight and fall, the proportions of her face, consistent with Rachel Vasquez. I saved the image. I added it to my spreadsheet. I noted first clear facial detail, expression attentive alert, directly facing camera, steep ravine trail, same trail as Oberlin disappearance. I don't know why I didn't go to someone at this point. The police, the Parks Department management, anyone, I think, and I've thought about this a great deal in the time since. I think it was because I didn't have anything to go to them with. What would I say? 2 people who match the general physical descriptions of 2 missing persons appear to be standing on public trails in a county that has hundreds of miles of trails, that they're in photographs, but that no photographer remembers seeing them, that their posture is unusual. None of this is evidence of anything. None of this is illegal. Two living people standing on a trail is not a crime and not an emergency, and not even particularly interesting to anyone who isn't sitting in a beige office, obsessively cataloging background figures in nature photographs. And there was something else. Something I'm less comfortable admitting. I was not afraid of them. I was afraid of what it would mean if I reported this and someone investigated and found nothing. Because then I would be the person who saw patterns that weren't there, who turned background noise into conspiracy, who couldn't handle the simple boring job of social media coordination without turning it into something it wasn't. I could not afford to be that person. Not financially. I needed this job, and not psychologically. I was already more isolated than I wanted to be. I had moved to Marin from Portland 18 months prior for this position and had made exactly 2 friends, both of whom were work acquaintances I saw outside the office, maybe once a month. My apartment above the laundromat was small and loud, and I couldn't afford to move. My life had the specific quality of something that was functional but not robust. One removed support beam away from structural failure. So I said nothing. I kept my spreadsheet. I kept reviewing photographs, and they kept appearing. By the end of April, my spreadsheet had 31 entries. By mid-May, 40. The rate was increasing, or rather, submissions were increasing with the warm weather. And I was finding them in roughly 1 of every 8 photographs submitted. This rate was consistent, I checked. It did not increase or decrease over time. 1 in 8, like a fixed probability, like a natural constant. In May, something changed, not in the photographs, in me. I started dreaming about trail compositions, not nightmares, not frightening dreams, just frames. Rectangular compositions with vanishing points on dirt paths, green walls of vegetation, olfat depending on the time of day. My sleeping mind chose to render. And in these frames, always in the background, always in the periphery, 2 figures standing with the patience of trees. I would wake from these dreams at 5 or 6 in the morning, before my alarm, and lie in bed listening to the tumble of the dryer in the laundromat below, and think about angles, camera angles, the direction the photographers were facing when they took their shots. Because something had occurred to me in one of these half-sleep states that I hadn't considered when awake in every photograph, in all 40-plus entries on my spreadsheet. The 2 figures were facing the camera, not the trail, not the scenery, the camera specifically. This shouldn't have been possible to determine with certainty, and I want to be honest that it might be confirmation bias. When a figure is 30 or 50 or 80 feet away and slightly out of focus, determining exact eye line is unreliable. They could be facing any direction within a 20-degree arc, and it would look the same in a compressed digital image, but I mapped it anyway. I took each photograph and drew a line from the photographer's estimated position through the 2 figures, and in every case, the figure's shoulders were perpendicular to that line, facing the camera, as if oriented not by compass or trail or terrain, but by the act of being photographed. In early June, I did something impulsive. I went hiking. This requires context. I had not hiked once in my 14 months in Marin County. Despite working for the Parks Department, despite spending 40 hours a week looking at trail photographs, I had never set foot on a single trail. This was not intentional avoidance. It was simply that I didn't hike. I was an indoor person. I drove to work, sat at a desk, drove home, sat on my couch. The outdoors was something I administered, not something I participated in. I chose Phoenix Lake because it was close, a 10-minute drive from my apartment, and because it was a loop, which meant I couldn't get lost, and because it was popular, which meant there would be other people, and because David Wannett's photograph from March had placed them there in the rain, and I wanted to see the spot where they'd been standing. I don't fully know why I wanted that. I think I wanted to see it be ordinary, to stand where they'd stood and feel nothing, and have that normalcy dissolve whatever had been building in my mind for 4 months. I went on a Saturday morning. The lot was half full. I could hear voices on the trail ahead of me, a family with young children moving slowly. The trail was wide and flat where it circled the lake, compacted dirt with an even surface, redwoods and bay laurel on both sides, the smell of bay leaves in warm air, that particular peppery sweetness, birdsong, water, light filtering through canopy and shifting columns as the breeze moved branches. I walked the full loop, 2 miles. It took me an hour because I walked slowly, looking. I looked at every shadow between trees. I looked at every off-trail space where 2 people could stand. I looked at the exact spot I recognized from the composition of David Wannett's photograph, a particular conjunction of 2 redwood trunks and a depression in the ground between them, where they had been standing in the rain in March. Nothing, nobody, just forest. Just a patch of ground between 2 trees, covered in redwood duff and leaf litter, slightly lower than the surrounding terrain. I stood on it. I felt nothing except the mild discomfort of standing on uneven ground and the vague awareness that I looked odd, a person standing off trail for no visible reason. I went home. I felt better. I told myself that the hike had accomplished what I'd intended. It had made the landscape ordinary again, had restored the proper relationship between me and the photographs I spent my days reviewing. They were photos of places, real places with dirt and smell and sound, not frames containing mysteries, just places. The following Monday, I reviewed submissions as usual. There were 12 new tagged photographs from the weekend. I opened them one by one. The 7th photograph was taken at Phoenix Lake. Saturday morning. The photographer was a man named Brian Kelsey. His shot showed the east side of the loop trail, looking south, the lake visible through the trees on the right. In the background of his photograph, on the trail itself, visible between 2 other hikers who were clearly in motion, there was a person walking alone. The person was wearing the clothes I had worn on Saturday, the same gray jacket, the same dark jeans, the same white sneakers that were inappropriate for trail walking. The person was approximately my build from the back, at a distance of maybe 30 feet behind the photographer's position. And behind that person, behind me, if it was me, Standing just off the trail in the tree shadow, there were two figures, motionless, facing not the trail, not the photographer, but the figure between them and the camera. Facing me, I stared at this for a long time. The fluorescent light buzzed. Marcus coughed. A car started in the parking lot below. I stared at the image on my screen, and what I felt was a total body-wide stillness that I recognized from one previous experience in my life, the moment in childhood when I slipped off a high diving board and there was a half-second of free fall before the water hit me. The absolute cessation of thought that comes when reality lurches and hasn't yet stabilized into something you can respond to. They had been behind me. While I was looking for them, they had been behind me. While I stood on the ground between the two redwoods and felt nothing, they had been somewhere on that trail, and they had been looking at me. Or, and this was the thought that followed immediately, the thought my rational mind produced in self-defense. This was a coincidence. The figure in the gray jacket could be anyone. There are 100 gray jackets on any trail, on any Saturday. I was seeing myself in this image the same way I was seeing Daniel Oberlin and Rachel Vasquez in other images by fitting generic visual data to a conclusion I'd already reached. I saved the image. I added it to my spreadsheet with a note I didn't fully believe possible self, unconfirmed. Cannot determine identity from rear angle at distance. I did not go hiking again. June continued. The days got longer and the fog pattern shifted. Morning fog, burning off by noon, returning at sunset. Submissions stayed high. I found them in 6 more photographs. My spreadsheet reached 48 entries. I was maintaining it with the precise, passionless regularity of someone taking medication. They're not sure is helping. Every entry followed the same format. Every entry described the same thing. And then, on June 23rd, I received an email from a photographer named Alice Montoya. She was a semi-professional landscape photographer who used our hashtag often. I'd featured her work 3 or 4 times. Her email was not directed at me. Specifically, it went to our general department address that I monitored. Hi, weird question. I was shooting on the coastal trail yesterday near Pirates Cove, and when I reviewed my shot, there are 2 people standing in the background of several frames. I shoot in burst mode, so I have about 15 shots from the same angle. They're in all of them, but I was alone on that section of trail. I'm positive I was alone because I was specifically waiting for hikers to clear the frame. I waited maybe 10 minutes for the trail to empty and then shot. Can you look at these and tell me if you recognize them? I'm mildly freaked out. They're really just standing there in every single frame. She'd attached the images. 15 shots taken over a span of approximately 4 seconds based on the metadata, all from the same position. Same composition, the coastal trail curving along the bluff, ocean below, headlands in the distance. In every frame, all 15, burst mode, 4 seconds. 2 figures stood on the trail approximately 60 feet behind her camera position. Same posture, same clothing, same orientation facing her in burst mode. 15 frames in 4 seconds. They didn't move between frames. Not a shift of weight, not a turn of the head, not a swing of an arm. They were absolutely, perfectly, frame by frame still. Humans are not still in that way. Even standing, even trying to be still, the human body sways. It compensates. At 60 feet and this resolution, you'd expect at least the blur of micro-movement between burst frames. There was none. I did not respond to Alice Montoya's email. I don't know why. I should have. She was asking for help, and I had information. Not useful information, maybe, but context. I had a spreadsheet with 48 entries that would have told her she wasn't crazy. That would have told her she wasn't the only one. But I didn't respond because responding would have made it a conversation. And a conversation would have made it real in a way that my spreadsheet did not. A spreadsheet is personal. It's a document that exists only in relation to me. A conversation has two people in it, and two people can agree that something is happening. And agreement is the foundation of action. And action was something I was not prepared to take. I archived her email. I saved her images. I added them to the spreadsheet. I went home and stood in my kitchen, not eating, and listened to the dryer tumble below me and thought about the 15 identical frames and the absolute absence of motion between them. The next day, Alice Montoya posted one of the images on her Instagram. She didn't tag us. She tagged it with creepy and WTF and Marin trails. In the caption, she wrote, "Shot Pirates Cove yesterday. Was alone on the trail. Who are these people? They weren't there when I was shooting, I swear. Does anyone know them?" The post got 11 comments in the first day. Most were jokes. Trail ghosts, lol. That's just Gary and Linda. They hike there every day. Your camera is haunted. One person said they looked like Photoshop. Another said it was probably just hikers who came around the bend while she was focused on her composition. I checked the post every few hours. By the end of the week, it had 43 comments. Most were still dismissive or joking, but 3 were not. The first was from a user named @TrailMikeMarin. I have these people in like 5 of my photos from TAM this year. Always in the background. Always just standing there. Thought I was losing it. The second was from @JenPark. Jenny Park. The woman who'd photographed them at the top of the ladder on steep ravine. I have them too. Multiple times. They were right there on the trail above me in March, and I didn't see them until I looked at the photo later. Like they weren't there when I was shooting, but they're there in the image. The third was from an account with no profile photo and a generic username @useR8827361, and it said only, "They don't photograph well in person either." I don't know what that meant. I still don't. The comment was deleted within 6 hours. I screenshot all of it. I added it to a folder on my desktop that I'd created for this purpose. A folder I'd labeled Trail Figures, and which contained my spreadsheet. 51 photographs, Alice Montoya's 15-image burst sequence, and now screenshots of an Instagram thread. This was July. The folder existed. The spreadsheet existed. The photographs existed. Everything was documented. And I was doing absolutely nothing with any of it. I need to explain why, and the explanation is not flattering. I was doing nothing because doing something would have required me to decide what this was, and deciding what this was would have eliminated the possibility that it was nothing. As long as I was only collecting data, I was a person with a hobby, a slightly obsessive, slightly eccentric documentation hobby that harmed no one and meant nothing. The moment I acted on the data, I became a person who believed something, and the thing I would have to believe was impossible. Dead people do not stand on hiking trails. Missing people who have been searched for extensively and never found do not reappear, motionless in strangers' photographs. Human beings do not remain perfectly still across 15 burst mode frames at a shutter speed of 1/1500th of a second. People do not face cameras they cannot see being operated. None of this is possible. All of it was documented in a folder on my desktop. In late July, I was tagged in a post. Not the department account, my personal account, which I used rarely, and which had maybe 200 followers, mostly old college friends, and some Portland acquaintances. Someone had tagged me in a photograph. The photograph was from the account @Trail Mike Marin, the person who'd commented on Alice Montoya's post. Mike Reeves, I'd later learn his name was. The photo was of the Matt Davis Trail, taken that morning based on the timestamp. Standard composition trail through coastal scrub, descending toward the ocean. Two figures in the background, standing. In the caption, he'd written, "Hey, my username, you work for Marin Parks, right? Can you tell me who these people are? They're in so many of my shots this year. Always different trails, same people." He'd tagged me because he'd somehow connected my personal account to the parks department. Maybe through mutual followers, maybe through my bio, which mentioned my job title. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he'd tagged me, which meant my name was now connected to this publicly, which meant the choice I'd been avoiding. The decision about whether to engage had been made for me by a stranger. I didn't respond publicly. I sent him a direct message. "Hi, Mike. Yes, I work for Marin Parks. I've noticed them too. Can we talk?" He replied. Within minutes, he was eager. Too eager in a way that made me uncomfortable. He'd been documenting them since March, later than me, but with more aggression. He had 22 photographs. He'd been going to trails specifically to photograph them. He'd been returning to spots where they'd appeared and waiting with his camera for hours. "Have you ever seen them?" I asked. "Not in photos, with your eyes, no." He said, "That's the thing. They're never there when I'm shooting. Only in the photos after. Then how do you go looking for them?" "I go to the trails where they've shown up before. I take hundreds of photos, different angles, different times, and when I review them, they're in maybe 1 out of every 20. Just standing there, always the same 2 people, always. Same guy, same woman, same clothes, same positions. Do they ever move between shots, a pause? Then no, I've never caught them mid-step or turning or anything. They're just there, and then in the next shot, they're not." "Do you know about the missing hikers?" I asked. Daniel Oberlin and Rachel Vasquez A. Longer pause. "Yeah," he said, "I know. And I don't want to be the person who says it. Neither do I. We agreed to meet. In person, in public, during daylight, He suggested a coffee shop in Mill Valley. I agreed because meeting felt like action, and action, even if it was just drinking coffee with a stranger, felt like progress towards something, though I couldn't have said what. Mike Reeves was younger than I'd expected, maybe 25. He was a trail runner more than a hiker, lean and sunburned, with the specific energy of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors alone. He had a laptop with him and a folder of printed photographs that he spread on the table between our cups. His images were different from the ones I reviewed for work. He was a better photographer than most casual submitters, better composed, better exposed. And because he'd been specifically trying to capture the figures, he'd used longer lenses, tighter crops. In several of his images, the two figures were almost in the mid-ground, large enough to make out clear details. The man's jacket was olive green. It had a small tear or patch on the left shoulder that was visible in 3 different photographs from 3 different trails. His boots were brown, trail-worn. His pack was gray with a blue hydration hose visible over the right shoulder strap. The woman's red collar was the edge of a quarter-zip pullover, faded from what might once have been bright red to a darker, washed-out crimson. Her hair was tied back in some photographs and down in others, which I noted but did not say was the first sign of change or variation I'd observed in them. Her pack was smaller than the man's, black, with a single strap across the chest. "They look real," Mike said, and his voice had the quality of someone stating the obvious but needing to state it anyway. "They look like 2 people on a hike, except for the standing and the never moving and the note being there when you look. And the facing the camera," I said. "Right, yeah, that." We talked for 2 hours. We compared spreadsheets. His was less organized than mine, but contained observations I hadn't made. He'd noticed that the figures never appeared in photographs taken from behind, from a position on the trail, where they would be between the photographer and the camera. They only appeared in frames where the camera was facing them, as if they only existed in the direction of observation. He'd also noticed that they never appeared in photographs containing more than 4 other people. Crowded trail sections, popular overlooks with groups of hikers, parking lot backgrounds, never. Only in photographs where the surrounding trail was relatively empty, as if there were a capacity limit for their appearance, or as if they required a certain ratio of empty space. "I have a theory," he said, and I waited because I both wanted and didn't want to hear it. "I think they're not there. I think they're in the photographs. Only in the photographs. They exist in the image, but not in the space the image depicts." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "I know. That's not how photographs work. I know. But tell me what does make sense." I couldn't. We parted with an agreement to keep sharing observations. He gave me his phone number. I gave him mine. I drove home to my apartment and sat in the parking lot behind the laundromat for 20 minutes before going inside because the apartment felt too small to contain both me and the knowledge I now had a collaborator in. August. The figures were in 59 of my spreadsheet entries now. and Mike was sending me 2 or 3 new photographs a week. The count was growing, but the phenomenon was stable. 1 in 8 for casual submissions, roughly 1 in 20 for Mike's deliberate attempts. They never appeared in video. Mike had tried extensively, shooting video for hours on various trails and reviewing every frame. Nothing. Only in still photographs. Only in single captured instance. This distinction bothered me more than anything else. It implied something about the nature of what they were, that they existed at a shutter speed, but not at a frame rate, that they could inhabit a frozen moment, but not a continuous stream. I didn't know what to make of this. Mike had a theory about quantum observation that I didn't follow, and that sounded, frankly, like the kind of reasoning that leads people to write manifestos. In mid-August, I finally went to my supervisor. Not Marcus. He'd since rotated to a different role. My new supervisor was a woman named Diana Choi, younger, sharper, more likely to take things seriously, or at least to follow protocol about them. I showed her the spreadsheet. I showed her 30 photographs. I explained the timeline, the locations, the physical consistency of the figures, the correlation with missing persons cases. The photographer reports of the trail being empty during shooting. I presented it factually, without interpretation, without theory. Diana looked at everything. She took 30 minutes. She was quiet for most of it. When she finished, she looked up at me, and her expression was not what I expected. She wasn't scared. She wasn't concerned. She was thinking. "What do you want me to do with this?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I wanted someone else to see it." "Okay, I see it." She gestured at the screen. "I see a pattern you've identified. And I'll say this, it's a pattern. There's clearly something consistent here. Same 2 people, same posture, same clothing, appearing across multiple independently submitted photographs over months. So what do we do?" She leaned back. "What can we do? They're not breaking any law. They're standing on public trails. The connection to the missing persons cases is, and I'm being honest with you, it's suggestive but not evidentiary. You can't identify them definitively from these images. No detective is going to open a case based on the fact that 2 background figures in trail photos somewhat resemble 2 people who went missing. She was right. I knew she was right. "But I'll flag it," she said. "I'll send the pattern to the Ranger Operations team and let them decide if it's worth an increased presence on the named trails. That's the most I can do through proper channels." I thanked her. I went back to my desk. I don't know if she ever sent the flag. I never heard about it again. September came. Mike Reeves was hiking almost daily now, devoted to his documentation with an intensity that I found increasingly uncomfortable. He was sending me 5, 6, 7 photos a week. His messages were getting longer, more speculative. He'd started referring to the figures as them with a familiarity that felt wrong, as if they were people he knew, neighbors he was tracking. He talked about their positions relative to each other, the micro variations in the woman's hair, the exact degree of the man's head tilt. "Do you notice she stands closer to him? Now he messaged me in mid-September compared to March." Go back and look. She used to be a half step behind, but now they're almost level. They're converging. I didn't go back and look. I didn't want to confirm or deny this observation, because engaging with it felt like participating in something I'd been careful to only observe. On September 28th, Mike sent me a photograph that was different from all the others. He'd shot it on the Cataract Trail, a heavily shaded path above Alpine Lake that descends through a series of small waterfalls. The image showed the trail from above, looking down. The photographer standing on a rock outcrop above the path. Two figures below, on the trail, closer than any previous photograph, maybe 12 feet from the camera position. The angle was steep, looking down at them from above, so for the first time their faces were not directed at the camera. They were facing forward, along the trail, their heads slightly bowed, as if the camera's positions confused whatever orientation system determined their facing. But that wasn't what made this photograph different. What made it different was the third figure, standing behind the two, behind the man and the woman who had been constant and unchanging and paired for the entire 7 months I'd been watching. There was a third person, a woman shorter than the other two, different clothing, a light blue jacket, dark pants, hair cropped short. She was standing in the same posture, same off-trail position, same stillness, but she was new. I enlarged the image. The resolution was good. Mike was using a proper camera, not a phone. I could see her clearly. She was younger than the other two, maybe early 20s. Her face was round, and her expression, in the way I'd come to read expression in these photographs, was the same attentive, engaged look I'd seen on the man's face at Steep Ravine. Interested, present, listening. I opened the missing persons registry for Marin County. It took me less than a minute to find the new entry. Gabrielle Torres, 23. Last seen at the Cataract Trailhead parking lot on September 14th, 2 weeks before Mike's photograph. Solo hiker. Car found at the lot. Pack, water, gear all missing. Search ongoing. I called Mike. He didn't answer. I texted him. Who is the third person? He replied. An hour later, I know. I saw. I checked the registry too. Mike, we need to go to the police and tell them what? That 3 missing people are standing invisible on hiking trails and only showing up in still photographs. With what evidence? Blurry images of people who might match descriptions that could describe anyone. We have 70+ photographs of hikers standing on trails. That's what any cop is going to see. He was right. He was right, and I hated that he was right. And I hated that we'd been accumulating evidence for months that proved absolutely nothing to anyone who wasn't already inside the pattern with us. We could show them the burst sequence, I said. Alice Montoya's 15 frames. No human stands that still. You'd need an expert to confirm that. You'd need a biomechanics analysis. You'd need funding and institutional interest and someone willing to champion a case based on people standing slightly too still in photographs. I didn't respond. The next morning, a Monday, I went to work and reviewed submissions as usual. There were 9 new tagged photographs from the weekend. I opened them with the specific dread that had replaced my earlier neutral professionalism, the dread of knowing that I was probably about to find something, and being unable to stop the process of looking. The fourth photograph was from Ring Mountain, golden hour, the serpentine grassland glowing green gold, a perfect shot. 3 figures on the hillside below, standing, facing the camera. It was consistent now. 3. The new shape of the group. October, November. Mike's documentation continued. My spreadsheet passed 100 entries. The 3 figures appeared in one of every 8 casual submissions, one of every 20 deliberate attempts. The ratios never changed. They had rules, or their presence had rules, and the rules were as consistent as physical law. In November, a 4th figure appeared. A man, older, heavyset, wearing a green vest over a flannel shirt. I did not check the missing persons registry at this time. I did not need to. I knew what I would find. Mike and I stopped talking about going to the police. We stopped talking about theories. Our messages became purely documentary: date, trail, number of figures, any variations observed. We were recording. That was all. Recording and filing and going to sleep and waking and recording more. In December it rained for 3 weeks straight. Submissions dried up. Only 4 photographs came in across the whole month. The figures were in one of them. All 4 now, standing in a downpour on the Bolinas Ridge Trail, soaked and motionless and patient. I spent Christmas alone in my apartment. The laundromat was closed for the holiday, and the silence from below was strange. The absence of the dryer's constant tumbling left a kind of acoustic space that felt unfilled. I thought about the figures standing in the rain, about their patience, about what waiting means when you have nowhere to be and nothing to do except exist in the fractional instant of someone else's shutter release. In January, exactly 1 year after I'd first noticed them, without registering what I was noticing, Mike sent me a message that was different from his usual dry documentation. "I'm going to try something," he wrote. "I'm going to take a photo of myself. Self-timer on the trail. I want to see if they appear behind me." "Don't," I replied immediately, and the speed of my response surprised me. Why not? I typed and erased 3 responses before settling on, because every person who has appeared in those photographs was alone on the trail when they disappeared. He didn't respond for 2 days. Then I'm going to do it. Coastal Trail, Saturday morning. I'll text you before and after. Saturday came. At 7:50 a.m., he texted heading out. Coastal Trail from Muir Beach parking lot. Beautiful morning. We'll set up at the overlook near Pirates Cove. At 8:45 a.m., he texted set up the camera, 10-second timer. Took 12 shots of myself standing on the trail. Reviewing now, at 8:47 a.m. he texted, "Oh fuck." At 8:48 a.m. he texted an image. The image showed Mike standing on the coastal trail, facing his camera, which was positioned on a rock approximately 20 feet away. Behind him, the trail curved toward the overlook. The ocean was visible below the bluff, gray-blue and enormous. Standing behind Mike, not far behind, maybe 10 feet, were 4 figures. The man in the olive jacket, the woman with the red collar, the shorter woman in the light blue jacket, The older man in the green vest. They were standing in their usual formation, close together, facing the camera. But they weren't facing the camera. For the first time in over 100 observations, they were not oriented toward the lens. They were facing Mike, all four of them arranged in a shallow arc behind him, facing the back of his head. At 8:52 a.m., he texted, "I'm leaving. I'm going to my car right now." At 8:53 a.m., he texted, "I don't see them. They're not here. I've turned around 3 times and they're not here." At 9:01 a.m., he texted, "In my car, driving, hands are shaking. Going to call you when I get home." He called me at 9:40 a.m. He was audibly shaken. His voice had the fast, breath-heavy quality of adrenaline processing. We talked for 40 minutes. He described taking the photos, reviewing them on his camera's screen, seeing the figures for the first time, not in post-processing, but immediately right there, looking at his camera's LCD screen while standing on the trail where, behind him, there was nothing. They were so close, he said, 10 feet. If I'd taken 1 step backward, what I don't know what would have happened. Are you going to stop going out there? A long pause. I don't think that matters. I think they're in the photos regardless of where I am. I think they're in everyone's photos. We just see them because we know to look. That's not what I asked. I know. He went quiet for a while. I listened to his breathing slow. Then he said something that has stayed with me, that I think about almost daily, 9 months later. "The photos on your department page," he said. "The ones you've been posting for over a year. The ones with them in the background. What about them? How many people have looked at those photos?" I didn't answer. The department Instagram had 11,000 followers. The Facebook page had 8,000. Photos were shared, reposted, screenshotted. "How many people," Mike said, "have looked at those photos and then gone hiking on those trails?" The fluorescent light above my desk buzzed. The parking lot outside held 3 cars. I heard Marcus's replacement, Diana, on the phone in the next room, discussing budget allocation for the spring season. "Are you suggesting," I said carefully, "that looking at the photos does something I'm suggesting that Gabrielle Torres was a follower of the department Instagram?" I checked. "She liked 3 of your posts in the week before she disappeared, posts that contained them." I did not speak. "I'm not saying that's how it works," Mike said. "I'm saying I can't prove it's not. I went home that day and did something I'd never done. I opened the department Instagram on my phone and scrolled through every Trail Moments post from the past year. I looked at the likes. I looked at the usernames. I cross-referenced them, one by one, with the missing persons cases. Daniel Oberlin had liked 2 Trail Moments posts in September, the month before his disappearance. Both posts contained, in their backgrounds, the 2 figures that would later become recognizable as Daniel Oberlin and Rachel Vasquez. Rachel Vasquez had never liked a post, but her roommate, whose name I found in the initial search reports, followed the account, and the roommate had shared one of our posts in a story tag that Rachel's was mentioned in. Gabrielle Torres, as Mike had said, had liked 3 posts in the days before she vanished. The 4th missing person, I'd eventually learned his name, was Howard Adebayo, 61, disappeared. November 2 had not interacted with our social media at all. But his daughter followed the account, and she had, according to her own Instagram stories from October, been showing her father beautiful hike ideas for his upcoming retirement. I sat in my apartment above the laundromat, and the dryer's gotser tumbled below me, and I looked at my phone, and I understood what I had been doing for 14 months. I had been posting them, selecting photographs that contained them, cropping them but not cropping them out, adding warm captions and relevant hashtags, publishing them to thousands of followers who looked at beautiful trail images and felt inspired to go hiking, and then went hiking, and some of them, a tiny fraction, a statistically insignificant number, disappeared. The selection had never been conscious. I had never once thought this photograph contains the figures. I should use it, but I had used them 11 times in my first 14 months, and more nynths, because the figures appeared in one of every 8 submissions, and I was selecting from submissions regularly, and 8 is not a hard number to hit when you're choosing 3 or 4 photos a week for 52 weeks. I did not go to work the next day. I called in sick. I stayed in bed until noon, and then sat at my kitchen counter without eating and thought about what a responsible person would do. A responsible person would stop posting photographs that contained the figures. That was simple. That was actionable. I could review every image I selected with the same obsessive background scanning I'd already been doing, and I could simply exclude any photograph that contained them. I could continue to do my job, and I could prevent anyone else from seeing them through my platform. But, and this is the part that I have not resolved, that I cannot resolve, that I am telling you because I need someone else to the weight of it. Stopping would require me to believe that looking at photograph of them was causal, that a digital image on a screen could somehow create a pathway between a viewer and a phenomenon that occurs on physical trails, that seeing them in a photograph was not documentation, but transmission. And if I believed that, then I had to believe that I had been transmitting something to 11,000 followers for over a year. That every shared post, every liked image, and every screenshotted trail photo had been spreading something I couldn't see, and couldn't name, and couldn't prove, and couldn't stop. And if I believed that, I had to reckon with the fact that I had seen them hundreds of times, more than anyone else, probably. I had stared at them for hours. I had enlarged them to full resolution. I had studied their faces and their postures and their clothing and their positions and their numbers and their slow, patient growth. If looking was the mechanism, I was more exposed than anyone. I went back to work the next day. I began excluding photographs that contained the figures from our posted selections. This was not difficult. It required an extra 5 minutes of review per batch. No one questioned why I rejected certain otherwise good photographs. No one asked. Mike continued to send me documentation. Through February, March. 5 figures now, then 6. Each new edition arrived without fanfare. Simply a new shape in the background, a new set of clothing, a new posture that quickly conformed to the group's collective stillness. I stopped checking the missing persons registry. I didn't want to know their names. In April, Mike stopped texting. His last message on April 3rd was a photograph from the Disappearance trail, the same trail where I'd first noticed the figures over a year prior. 6 figures in the background, no caption, no commentary, just the image. I texted him the next day, no response. The day after, no response. I called, voicemail. A week later, I checked his Instagram. The account was still active. His last post was from March 30th. A landscape shot of the Tennessee Valley Trail at sunrise. I looked at the comments, normal engagement, friends asking how he was. No one seemed concerned. I checked the missing persons registry. Mike Reeves, 26, last seen at the Disappearance Trail parking lot on April 3rd. Solo hiker, car found at the lot, camera bag, water, trail, snacks, all missing. I did not add him to my spreadsheet. 2 weeks later, a submission came in tagged from the Disappearance Trail. Beautiful shot, early morning. 7 figures in the background, standing in a loose group among the bay laurels. The 7th was lean and sunburned and wearing the particular black running vest that Mike always wore in his trail photos. I did not select this photograph for posting. I saved it. And I closed my laptop and I walked out of the office and down the stairs and stood in the parking lot in the sun and breathed and breathed and breathed. That was 3 months ago. I still work for the Parks Department. I still review submissions. I still maintain my spreadsheet, though I've stopped adding entries because the count doesn't matter anymore. What matter is the number, 7 figures now, as of last week, and the fact that it will keep growing, one by one, at intervals I cannot predict, in a process I cannot interrupt from my desk, in a beige office above a sandwich shop. I have not posted a photograph containing them since January. I check every image 3 times. I am meticulous. I am careful. I am doing the only responsible thing I can think of doing, which is refusing to be the mechanism of transmission, however small my platform, however uncertain the causation. But here is what I cannot stop thinking about. Here is the thing that keeps me awake at 5 a.m., listening to the dryers tumble below me. I have seen them hundreds of times, full resolution, faces, postures, positions. I have stared at them longer and more attentively than any person alive. If looking is what opens the door, if observation is the first step toward whatever process makes a person stop being on the trail and start being in the photograph, then I am further through that door than anyone who ever liked a post or went for a weekend hike. I have not gone hiking since that single trip to Phoenix Lake in June. I have not set foot on a trail. I have stayed in my apartment and my office and my car and the parking lots between them, and not. I have not gone near the green and the dirt and the fog and the trails where they stand. But last week I was reviewing a submission from Tennessee Valley. Standard composition, the trail, descending toward the beach, fog in the marine layer, a few other hikers in the midground. I was scanning the background for them, my usual 3-pass review, and I found them. 7 figures, far back, standing on the hillside above the trail. I was about to close the image and mark it rejected when I noticed something about the composition. The photographer had shot wider than usual, catching more of the surrounding landscape. And in the foreground of the image, visible through the window of a parked car, at the trailhead lot, there was a figure sitting in the driver's seat. I enlarged it. The car was a silver Honda Civic. The figure in the driver's seat was facing the windshield, hands on the steering wheel, apparently not moving, just sitting in a parked car at a trailhead parking lot. The figure was wearing a gray jacket. I don't own a silver Honda Civic. I drive a blue Subaru. I was at my desk when this photograph was taken. I can confirm this from my email timestamps, from Marcus's phone log in the next room, from the sandwich I bought at 12:15 from downstairs. I was not at Tennessee Valley. I was not in a parked car at a trailhead, but the gray jacket, the posture, the particular stillness of the figure's hands on the wheel. I cannot stop thinking about it. I cannot stop wondering whether the process I've been documenting has a preliminary stage, a stage before the trail, before the standing, before the joining, a stage where you sit in a parked car at the edge of a trailhead, and you don't get out, and you don't drive away, and you don't move, and you simply wait. The way they wait, facing forward into whatever comes next. I review photographs for a living. I sit at my desk, and I look at images of trails. And I have looked at them so long and so carefully that the question I cannot answer anymore is whether I am observing a phenomenon or rehearsing for it. My lease is up in August. I've been thinking about moving somewhere without trails, somewhere flat and paved and photographed by no one. But then I think everyone photographs everything now. Every street, every building, every parking lot and sidewalk and background of every selfie and video call. The world is made of images now, and images are where they live. I don't know if distance helps. I don't know if anything helps. I know that I am not on a trail, and I am not standing, and I am not still, and I am not facing anyone's camera. I know these things the way you know where you are when you're awake. But I also know that David Wannett was alone at Phoenix Lake in the rain, and Jenny Park didn't see them at the top of the ladder, and Alice Montoya's trail was empty when she pressed the shutter, and every person who appears in those photographs was somewhere ordinary and safe, right up until the moment they became extraordinary and still. I'm at my desk. It's Wednesday. The fluorescent light is buzzing. There are 4 cars in the parking lot, and I can see all of them from my window, and none of them contain a motionless figure in a gray jacket. The sandwich shop downstairs is playing music I can almost, but not quite identify. Diana is on the phone. The carpet smells like mildew because it rained last night. I am here. I am at my desk. I am not in anyone's photograph. I don't take photos anymore. I deleted the camera app from my phone. I covered my laptop's cam with electrical tape. These are precautions that I cannot justify rationally and that I maintain with absolute discipline, because the last thought I have every night, the thought that waits for me in the space between deciding to sleep and actually sleeping, is this: I have never taken a photograph of myself on a trail, but I have looked at photographs containing those figures more than any living person. And if the photographs are where they exist, and I have been inside those photographs with my attention for over a year, then the question is not whether I will end up standing on a trail. The question is whether I already am, whether somewhere in the folder on my desktop, in one of the 100+ images I've saved and studied and enlarged and stared at, there is a figure in the background that I have not yet recognized as myself, standing still, facing the camera, patient, present, waiting for me to scroll past without noticing the way I scrolled past everything else for 14 months before I learned to look. I haven't checked. I'm not going to check. The dryers tumble below me. The fog comes in at sunset. The submissions arrive every Monday, and I review them one by one, looking at backgrounds, looking at midgrounds, looking at everything except the possibility that what I'm looking for has already found me, and that finding it was never the danger. Being found was,